Welcome to hell. You're probably watching this video to see me suffer, and I will not be disappointing you. There are constantly respawning enemies, the resources go bad over time, and some of the trees explode. One thing I don't want to underestimate is the locals, so my first priority will be getting some on-site ammunition production going. That requires farming jelly nut for jelly to make some iron bacteria. I get my feet wet, literally, and set some up to produce via hand feeding. The solar here kinda sucks though, so I start making a bit of steam power from whatever I can chuck into a heating tower. The core loop of Gleba is that you farm plants, send the fruit to be processed, and then send the seeds back to be planted. You have to be quick about it though, because you've only got 15 minutes before it spoils, and it becomes impossible to get the seeds back. Mathematically, you can only end up seed positive in this process by using biochambers to get a productivity bonus. You can only farm on marshland, so the product needs to be carried a significant distance through water that needs to be landfilled. Thankfully, one of the few basic resources Gleba actually has is stone, so you can make landfill on site. When setting anything up to be produced on Gleba, you have to account for the possibility of spoilage. It can show up in any slot and shut things down entirely, so pretty much every machine needs to be able to off-put spoilage without mixing production, and I choose dedicated spoilage lines. This makes it virtually impossible to beacon anything. You can turn spoilage into nutrients, which can be used to run biochambers, but it spoils at half the time, and it's not the best for dealing with the large amounts of spoilage you'll be producing. Spoilage also isn't great for producing power, but it's basically free, and the heating towers burn through it nearly instantly. You can make a lot of these products using assemblers, and assemblers don't need nutrients, but they're also objectively terrible. Biochambers take pentapod eggs to produce, so that means you have to greet the locals. They also take absurd amounts of nutrients, which are required for absolutely everything. And you'd better not let them go hungry, because if your pentapod loop ever stops, then they'll hatch and try to kill you. I'm going to level with you. I spun my wheels on Gleba for a long time, because I didn't properly understand what it even wanted from me. It's partly because I'm flat out stupid, but I also blame the trigger technologies. What Gleba actually wants from you is to farm jelly nut and Yamako and combine it into Bioflux. Bioflux takes 2 hours to spoil, where everything else here spoils in 5 to 15 minutes. Bioflux can turn into 40 nutrients compared to the 1 nutrient per 10 spoilage or 6 nutrients per 1 Yamako. It also has better recipes for making metal bacteria and recipes for petrochemicals, but you only unlock those recipes in your crafting list after you've made a biochamber, and made 500 Bioflux. When you unlock Bioflux, the only recipe you can actually see is the recipe for nutrients, so I just assumed that was it. I get that the trigger tech is here to tell you to make more Bioflux, but I assumed that you only needed to make Bioflux in order to make the agricultural science packs, which I wasn't even going to attempt to make until I had a proper on-site economy going. Also, my eyes were hurting, because Gleba is a nightmare of visual pollution, and I read the recipe was for 1 nutrient that was 40% spoiled, not for 40 nutrients that were 100% unspoiled. So, in my mind at this point, Yamako mash is the only viable recipe for nutrients. So basically, I spend like 4 hours wondering why my gross domestic product is like 20 iron plates per hour. I don't know, I guess I figured Kovrex was a big fan of C-Block. Running the fruit via belt kinda sucks and can easily get locked up with spoilage, so I do what I always do in this situation and use a train. I don't actually recommend it, but it's what I know, and the comfort of familiarity can't be understated in this planet of manifested anxiety. The biggest issue with Gleba isn't actually spoilage, it's nutrients. Nutrients spoil, so you have to make them constantly, and biochambers need them to run. The best source of nutrients is Bioflux, which requires at least 3 prior processes that also take nutrients to run, so you have to feed your end product into the start of the process that creates the end product. Don't have the end product yet? Well, get wrecked, I guess. Gleba is a puzzle of how do you make an egg without a chicken, and basically the answer is bend over and strain until you lay one yourself, with the whole process being exactly as painful as that sounds. You can run out of seeds, you can run out of nutrients, you can run out of pentapod eggs. Stompers and strafers can delete you because they are constantly attracted by the spores your farms create to make the resources that you need to survive the attacks by stompers and strafers. Even now, I strongly don't believe that you can defeat the enemy spawned by the resources you harvest on Gleba with the resources you harvest on Gleba. So I consult a few friends, rewatched Dosh's Space Age video, and came back at it with a fresh approach. Step 1 is building a new ship specifically for transport to and from Gleba. Agricultural science can spoil, so it has to be express delivery. Planet Express, even. I also prod mod the hell out of Volcanus because why didn't I do this earlier? Step 2 is admitting that I'm not going to be producing rockets on Gleba. Even with the more effective bioflux recipes, it's just not worth it to produce on site. So instead, all of the ingredients of a rocket will be shipped in from Volcanus. Step 3 is getting jump scared by a pentapod attack while futzing in the menus on a space platform. Step 4 is to build a nuclear reactor. Gleba has water, which means power is basically free and infinite because I have some glowing rocks shipped in from Navis. Even if the total amount of power you want to make is small, I still always feel like a 2x2 reactor should be made because it quadruples the amount of power per fuel cell generated. Makes the base a lot more self-sufficient. You don't even have to consume the full 480 megawatts of heat one of these can put out, so long as you regulate fuel consumption. Step 5 is to leave. There's no subtle way to put this. Tesla turrets are a requirement for Gleba. All the enemies are designed to be hard countered by them, but resistant to all other forms of base defense. Gun and laser turrets don't have enough DPS. Rocket turrets and flamethrowers have a minimum range that stompers and strafers can just walk into even if there are walls. Tesla turrets don't have a limited range, deal more damage to enemies that have more body parts, slow down enemies that would otherwise just walk past all of your defenses, and most importantly, they don't require anything to run but electricity. A lot of electricity, but only electricity. But nuclear power exists, so we're fine. But why not use laser turrets? Well, congratulations. Everything on Gleba is 50% resistant to laser turrets, for reasons that are completely unrelated to the fact that the developer just wanted laser turrets to not be the solution. How are you supposed to possibly know all this? Well, apparently that's what YouTube content creators are for. Space Age has this problem all over, lock and key style puzzle mechanics. The game is a problem, and realistically only one solution that will solve it. So you'd better hope that through the hundreds of items with dozens of properties in your dozens of menus, that you read the correct one and divine the one line of attribute that actually solves the problem in the developer intended way. And then also hope that an arbitrary restriction wasn't put in the game to stop you from doing it that way. So, basically, it's back to full Gora. God, I wish I could stop coming back here. Tesla turrets aren't terribly hard to produce, but strangely, you need to make Tesla guns in order to make Tesla turrets. Okay, I guess I might as well arm myself with a few. Guns are basically the only inventory item you can take with you on a rocket, so why not? I'm tired of importing refined concrete for the EM plants, so I start making them on site. Just a trickle, but it's more than nothing. I'm already producing everything I need for the production chain of Tesla turrets, but each turret takes a staggering 800 electrolyte. That's a lot of Gatorade, and you may think that this would strain my holmium production. Nope, I'm bottlenecked on stone. I'm bottlenecked on stone of all things. A small amount of it is needed to make electrolyte. Such a small amount that it's always been sufficient to just take it from the small patch so far. But as it turns out, it's super helpful that earlier I forgot to account for stone until the very end of the Holmium machine's line, because now I can cipher stone from it and shove it into the same train that carries Holmium away. For a normal player, I would never advise putting more than one type of item on a train, but if you haven't picked up by now, trains are kind of my specialty. I will never solve any problem that can be solved with a train, with anything that is not a train. Also, I need to actually start voiding Holmium, because in the last 10 hours or so, it's gotten backed up, and I do need the batteries and stone that this machine makes. I still want the Holmium line pretty saturated though, so I set up a clock and use a duty cycle to only send Holmium to be destroyed every now and then. This is a great trick. I love using clocks for duty cycling. It's not actually that necessary all that often. I also realized that the electrolyte valves on EM plants are two-way, so I can daisy chain them. Helps me stuff a bit more production in here. I won't need too many Tesla turrets, but building robust never hurts. Alright, back to Gleba. I pretty much tore down everything I had made prior and left the farms to go to seed. I was smart enough to leave a bunch of big mining drills to feed a landfill assembler though. There's no point in putting up walls on Gleba, everything just goes over them. The turrets are your first and last line of defense. Rather than using this awful line of belts through the marshes, I'm going to use, you guessed it, a train. One for each farm. The trains themselves will run on spoilage, which is a bit like rubbing your feet on the carpet and trying to power a kettle with static electricity, but it works. Each train feeds the machines and then receives the power created by the process into dedicated slots in the wagon. The actual advantage of using a train for this are difficult to explain, if they even exist. Making out what the hell I'm even doing is not easy in this visual slurry, so I cordon off the farm's parameters using concrete. The amount of unburst vessels in my eyes is rapidly decreasing by the second, so I go into the options menu and turn off the fog, the clouds, and the decorations. I'd love to turn off the atmospheric rain effect, as that is probably murdering my bitrate, but that's not an option. Renewed determination be damned, I still don't really know what I'm doing, but having shifted from trying to make basic supplies to trying to shove out any amount of agricultural science that I can, at least from here, it's actually fumbling towards progress. Agricultural science takes bioflux and pentapod eggs, so one way or another, I'm going to figure out what bioflux is actually used for, and I guess that's how I was intended to discover it. Still kinda salty though. I wish I could say that some major breakthrough was made in this laborious 5-hour process, but really it was just fiddling with knobs and revising my builds continuously the whole time until I had something that worked. I have a major complaint for spoilage, and that is that it's pretty much impossible to tell how spoiled something is if it's on a belt unless it's more than 75% spoiled due to the overlapping of sprites. If there's some secret to always producing 100% unspoiled product from these machines, it's beyond me, because most of what I make seems to come out around 60%. Maybe direct insertion of spoilage from bioflux rather than using a nutrient carousel, I don't know, and I don't particularly care. The eventual design produces nutrients at the top and feeds them down into a combined bioflux and pentapod egg production facility that then feeds these products into the agricultural science production area. Spoiled pentapod eggs are dealt with using Tesla turrets. Efficient breeding is enforced by firing squad. The bioflux is then fed backwards through the system to make the nutrients that are needed to make the bioflux and the pentapod eggs. So that the system isn't 100% relying on itself running in order to keep itself running, I also have one failsafe assembler turning spoilage into nutrients to feed a bioflux to nutrient biochamber. This isn't nearly enough, and I won't discover this until much later, and the whole production line will fault multiple times, but that's just Gleba for you. Gleba is probably where most people just stop playing Space Age, and really, who can blame them? Spoilage and these recipes that require their end product to make the start product are both incredibly counterintuitive, and are less of an intriguing logistical challenge and more of just antagonistic design. Either of these aspects in isolation are probably fine. Both of them at the same time? No. Add that to a planet you can barely see and also has enemies that attack you regularly, and it's basically torture. Remember Vitamelange? I long for those days. Anyway, that's the first of the agricultural science. It takes like 2 hours to spoil, but I still wanted to fly direct. So, I launch another space platform for the agricultural science deliveries. The Planet Express is basically going to be running laps around the system delivering whatever to wherever. If you don't understand the name of this ship, don't worry about it. I'm still being dumb and using Yamako for nutrients right now, and shocker, you can't make enough nutrients with just Yamako to feed the pentapod eggs using just one farm. So I make another. One of the exports you need from Gleba is carbon fiber. It's Yamako mash and carbon. I could easily harvest the carbon from orbit, but instead I'll make it from burnt spoilage. I've got more than enough on hand. The other thing you need to make on Gleba is stack inserters, since they take jelly and jelly spoils quickly. But I can remote build a machine for that later when I actually care. I want to squash a few nests before I leave, and my god are they bulky and productive. The best way I can think to get rid of them is turret creep. I hate how small strafers can't be shot out of the air. You kinda just have to run from them until they either get a free hit on you or run out of gas. I've often heard the art style of Factorio compared to a late 90s, early 2000s RTS, specifically like Brood War. And I think the enemies take a lot of inspiration from that as well, since the players need to gather resources to do stuff, but the enemies just need to ask nicely to be handed an infinite amount of spawns to come kill you. I'm not done with Gleba. I'll be babysitting this thing for a while, but I can at least leave it behind for now and check back when it inevitably breaks. I know what you're thinking. Aw yeah, he's finished Gleba, he can make biolabs and get a huge productivity bonus on his research tech. However, I strongly suggest you consider the following.
No.
Biolabs require capturing some biters and then providing them with nutrients, and the biolabs also require nutrients, and that means shipping in bioflux from Gleba, which realistically wouldn't be that hard. However, biolabs are not required at the moment, and there are other things I can work on. I am sick to death of nutrients and spoilage, so instead, I'm just going to Aquilo. Aquilo is very far from the sun. It has basically no solar power, even in space, and it's surrounded by large asteroids which will shrug off gun turret fire. The solution is nuclear power and rockets. My cubic ship design, which I've been relying on so far, is actually too strained for power to reliably keep itself alive on regular journeys out to even Fulgora, without long stops to buffer resources in between. So, I gotta make a new ship.